vinegar strips the top layer of scale off, and you know, that's the layer that's hardest on the abrasives. So I'm going to cut out a pair of these 1/4 inch plates that get mounted to the sword, and then this guy will be a separate 1/8 inch plate which I'll mount over the top, and then lots of cutting and grinding to get the detail. While you can just blast through thin material without drilling a pilot hole, these details are so small that I was worried about doing that, so that's what the little holes are for. Start off the plasma arc properly. Well, that's the hard bit done. That was fairly nerve-wracking. That's good enough to clean up with a file now. I want to get a fireproof way of marking where these teeth are supposed to go, so that when I'm carving and welding and doing little bits of plasma cutting, I don't lose my marks. So now I'm going to use the die grinder to do almost a kind of a scrimshaw type thing, where I carve into these marks to make them look more like, you know, three-dimensional teeth. So when I was plasma cutting, you know, I tried to get it as close as I could, but the plasma cutter is not the most precise tool, so you can see the black outline is extra bits I want to take off. Some of it I'll get with the file, but some of it I can do with the die grinder with this thing on it, modified so it can take smaller heads. Probably not that safe, again, as usual. So this is the flesh, rotted flesh, I guess you'd call it. Bloop. There it is over the mouth. Next step is to, I'm probably going to weld/die grind a bump for the third eye. These two guys I might leave flat and just polish up the insides, and this guy I'm going to die grind a hollow on the back. The next step is going to be, I want to weld cheekbones and eyebrows in. So this piece of thin stuff I cut out is just to protect all the detail while I weld in the eyebrows and cheekbones. There's lots of like rotted skin and stuff. Might be able to get that with just, you know, eating into the surface, but these two features really need to be bumped out. As you can see, the spatter goes everywhere. There'd be less spatter if I could do one long clean weld, but because this is, you know, thinnish material and I'm doing kind of finicky stuff, I was doing it in little zaps. If I did try to do one big weld, it might melt straight through the material, which, you know, would be a nightmare. As it is, this is going to be a huge amount of cleanup. From the original drawing, go and try and do a couple of gouges and things with the grinder with the sanding disc in it. Combination of the die grinder and the sanding disc to try and mimic the kind of mottled, rotted kind of look this thing has. You can see the ears there. Bloop. Ears. All carved out of it like an 1/8 inch. So you know it goes down. Each one of those steps is fairly subtle, but you know, more than enough to feel with your finger. I have this sneaking suspicion that my plasma is only supposed to go up to 3/8 thickness. You can do 1/2 inch, it's just a little messier. There's no real need to do the horns on the sword out of hardened steel. Regular steel probably would have been okay. It's just like an added bonus, and plus I had this piece lying around. That wasn't too bad, even though it was 1/2 inch. Whew. Hot, hot, hot. I could tell that the plasma cutter was struggling. When it's struggling, instead of shooting down, the sparks will tend to shoot back up at the head, which in turn damages the head and it makes cutting more difficult. So that's one of those problems that can get out of control if you let it. Fresh out of the bath. So these horns are welded onto the front of the sword where the face is, but I want them, if you do that, it's not, it doesn't line up with the center line of the sword. It will kind of float on top, you know, it wouldn't be in the same plane. So I've welded these on here, and the idea is to use heat to bring this down to the level of this plate. And this is 5/8, the sword is 3/4 of an inch thick. So that's the general idea. The horn will now start work. A lot of the work of the disc is done by just the very edge. So they do if anything is weird looking, it becomes more obvious. Oh! The grooves side to side, just so they don't look completely different. Not that anyone would probably notice. If you're working outside on a hot day, you always have to make an executive decision between getting really, really hot and getting covered in tiny flakes of die grinder shrapnel.
What's shrapnel?
I always pick the shrapnel. I hate being hot. The way I work, a lot of the work of the disc is done by just the very edge. So they do a lot of cutting and carving, you know. So because of the little notches on these guys being so close together and so numerous, I decided I needed smaller ones to do it properly. So I printed up a thing and I cut smaller discs out of the larger ones. You know, I happened to have a smaller backing pad. But yeah, the smaller the disc, obviously the smaller a curve or a notch you can get to. I find the steel wire brush, it's good for evening things out. It makes, if anything is weird looking, it becomes more obvious. So this is one of those instances where even though I was the person who made these, even after I'm finished making them, they look kind of improbable to me. Like, if I saw them, I would not immediately jump to someone burned out the raw shape and then carved out all the notches. These two plates, which sandwich the blade, because of the imprecise nature of plasma cutting, they're slightly different. So I'm going to use this guy, the die grinder, set up in the clamp vertically, coming up through a hole in a plate. to make the two of them the same. So the nose I ground out a bit. That's more or less in the exact spot where I wanted to put the pupil. So they're weird coming into focus. It's hot today, so I'm probably not going to even after this. So to do that, I'm going to go twisting a massive tap, 3/4 inch tap, through those holes, and then putting threaded bar through, and that will lock the plates into place and give it this kind of big, like there's massive rivets holding it kind of look.
Hey mate, that's butter.
Tap has teeth facing in both directions.
Magic.
The way it cuts threads into a hole
pravi rezbata.
You turn it a little bit and then turn it the opposite direction, and the teeth facing the opposite way snip off what you've just, you know, like you trim a little bit of the thread and then you trim off that shaving and then trim another little bit and then trim off that shaving. Normally when you're tapping a hole, the main concern is breaking the tap because they're made out of very hard, super brittle stuff. But with a tap so big, my main concern was the you know, getting squished.
Dai go vidi mai.
Crack that I want to get out. Guard kept not too deep. The force to get it off, and it. But you know, in a good way. There it is, all cleaned up.
Bati mecze bata. Баху мамата. Това беше много и красиво нещо.
Oh, look at him, he's like grinding away.
This in theory is 90 degrees to this guy. Very carefully. It's fancy duct tape, basically. It's just thicker. Other replicas, slim blade.
Това си го сложиш на стената. Уникално е, 4 милиона гледания. Гледай, какво става?
Again, I noticed. Ah! Oh yeah. So next thing I'm doing is
стига бе! Много е красиво това нещо. Много. Това е талант и не знам.
So there it is, finished. The wise sword. Sapientes. I hope I'm saying that right. You can argue about how to pronounce the title of this video in the comments. You could pronounce it sapiens, but sapientes sounds more Latin-y. Yeah, go argue in the comments. That's what you guys can do. Now some obligatory me hitting something with it. So yeah, I mean it's way more usable than my normal ones. But putting this guy on.
Ба, какво да правим, бате?
This is Man-at-Arms, Reforged.
Perhaps no blade has been more revered throughout history than the katana. And today we're making the epic Nodachi sword, a katana-style blade that is used by the Kensei in For Honor, which will be available on February 14th. In For Honor, players can step into a visceral battlefield and fight as some of history's greatest warriors, the Vikings, the Knights, and the Samurai. Any katana-style sword over 30 inches was a Nodachi, which made for a fearsome weapon. The Nodachi that we are making is based on the real swords of the Japanese samurai. In Japanese, samurai translates as those who serve. This meant a samurai dedicated his life to mastering the art of combat in order to defend their master. Legend has it that they took this so seriously that a samurai could neither be born nor die without a sword nearby. Now that is commitment.
Even though this blade is going to be made out of traditional Japanese Tahamagani steel, and that's a pretty big deal. We've shown you that several times, and we usually skip over the fittings pretty quickly. Because we've seen a lot of requests to show more work on the fittings and the fit and finish, we're going to jump right into the hand beveling of the blade and then move on to the highly detailed fittings.
Oh.
We need some thick masses of copper for some of these fittings. We'll be melting down some copper pipe. It'll go in the
Абе,
crucible,
колко
come up
струва
over 2000 degrees
играта
Fahrenheit,
For
be
Honor?
poured
Колко
directly
струва?
into an ingot mold, and then we'll begin forging the ingot to get the sheet we'll be making the Suba from.
Now that the blade is forged, it's time to start the stock removal portion of this build. I'm just going to follow the guidelines that Ilya's forged into this blade already, take out a few of the little bumps here and there, and then I'll hand it off to him. He'll get it clayed and heat treated. Because this material is so precious, and we are going to be quenching it with water,
Колко
I wanna
струва
make sure my edge thickness
играта,
stays
искам
nice
да
and
кажа.
thick, just to play it on the safe side. So you'll notice I'm taking my time and make sure I don't remove too much material.
По-добре ли е сега?
After annealing, Rick and I begin to drive this ingot down on itself. We'll need to anneal it several times. As it begins to flatten out, it'll give us a better consistency of material that we can cut and form the Suba from.
Добре. Аз ще си я взема.
It is a tradition in Japanese swords to
Аз ще си я
prefer
взема.
differential heat treating that is usually
Това е
achieved
срещу истински
by
хора и
masking
така
off
да
the
се
back
биеш,
of the blade
бате.
with clay
С това ще бъде
and
страхотно.
leaving the edge uncovered. If you notice, there are small lines of clay extending
Honor.
from the back clade
For
to
Honor.
the edge. Those are called
Аз си я
usher
взема.
lines. The purpose of usher lines
Струва
is to
си май.
introduce smaller regions of softer material extending from the back to the edge. That prevents chipping that might occur during combat.
So we've continued to reduce this ingot down, and we have a fair amount of material, and it's much more than what we need. So we're going to keep working this down. We're going to get it down just above a 1/4 inch, and then saw pierce and cut out the entire piece for the Suba. So I'm still mostly doing roughing work, and I'm also doing some grinding, so I'm not going to worry about hammer marks too much.
Now that the clay is nice and dry on the surface of the blade, it's time to heat treat. Since this is really precious material, we are taking a risk going into water, but we really want to show you this. As he removes the blade from the quench, you can see it's gained a lot of curve. It went in straight, came out just right. Using the template that Ilya gave her, Lauren's now going to lay the design onto our copper it out. Now that the shape is cut out, Lauren's going to go around the entire edge with a file, making a nice clean bevel.
The middle of the handle, the tsuka, has a copper ornament. The game designers executed that in a very Victorian style, so consequently, I'm going to use a set of chisels, first a liner, to outline the design. Then I'm going to use a planishing chisel to push the design back. The pitch, which fills the ornament, is going to push the design up, and at that stage I will rotate to more finer set of chisels to do all the detail work.
So now we have the copper suba finished. The outside edges are all done. The surfaces are just about where they're going to be before we patina. What we've got to do now is we've got to fit it to the blade. We already have a steel suba that's fitted to that blade to make sure that we could get this shape right. So what we'll be doing now is we're going to overlay this. I'm going to scratch in the ink the shape of that hole, drill the hole, saw pierce all the way around until it fits, and then we'll do all hand file fit.